prepared bike, a one-off design by a very clever Whanganui designer, Steve Roberts. In fact, the design of this bike jointly won the UDC Inventors Television Program Award for its unique monoshock suspension system underneath the bike. The monoshock is mounted right underneath the motor. A one-off special. Dave Hiscock helped him with the development of it, and together they have made up a winning team.
It certainly looks as if it soaks up the bumps very nicely.
So there's the winner, Dave Hiscock from Wellington, who now races in England and Europe on the Formula One Special, the Suzuki-powered machine, dominating here. Second place goes to Stu Avant, the expatriate Christchurch man, and third place after a tremendous fight back.
Welcome back, folks, to this next session of Off the Cuff with Steve Roberts. It's my great pleasure to introduce David Hiscock for this session. David, you've been one of this country's major motorcycle influences in the 70s and 80s, riding the big production bikes, 5 times winner of the Castrol 6-hour race, once with brother Neville, and then tremendous achievements at the Isle of Man in the 80s and much other as well. So welcome and thank you for joining us here today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and it's quite special, I know, for Steve Roberts to have this association, because he's talked a lot over the years about his association with you, and I think it was a special one in the sense that he says, well, when it came to Dave Hiscock, he told me what he wanted and I did it. And what's your recollection of that engagement, particularly around the series that we've got here, which is the Plastic Fantastic, and then the earlier bikes from there? Can you take us through that experience, how it got going? And
I'd come back from Europe and wasn't sure about going what I was going to do for the following year, going back there to contest in the World Formula One Championship. And I think it was Steve Dundon that suggested that maybe a guy called Steve Roberts, which I'd heard of but didn't know too much about him. So I think Steve suggested that that he might be a possibility, depending how busy and that he was, of building a bike, you know.
Yeah.
Steve was a little bit interested. He didn't commit himself. So we had a meeting. Steve asked me what I would like in a motorbike, and he was suggesting the monocoque type frame, which did interest me. Because I wasn't sort of too conservative. I was prepared to try something, and it sounded very practical, you know, to have like the fuel tank and the seat as sort of part of the frame. I think he thought about it for a week or two, and then I had another discussion on the phone with him, I think, where he said, yeah, he's prepared to give it a try if I was prepared to go with the monocoque type construction.
Right.
And I said, yes, I am prepared. I'd done a bit more research about monocoque construction, and I was quite excited about it.
Yeah.
So I think then we had another discussion with Steve as to the geometry of the bike, and what I would see as, you know, a bike that could actually do some winning, provided the rider was up to it. And I told Steve that I wanted something as lightweight as possible, that the weight was a big concern, and that I needed something that would turn quite quickly, going through S-bends and on tight corners. It needed to be able to turn quickly, but needed to be stable on very fast circuits, and on where the roads were sometimes a bit rough. On some of the road circuits, like the Isle of Man and that, stability was really important. So yeah, I told him what I wanted, and I think he went away and gave it some more thought again. And then with the help of Rod Coleman, production started.
And out of that production came the first version, the aluminium.
Correct.
The aluminium version.
Yes.
And you took that to...
back to England.
To England.
Yes.
Before you took it, what was the process in terms of testing? So at some stage, you through that process, you arrived, and Steve's built it, and from there.
Steve had built it, and I was here from time to time. I would come up to Steve's workshop from time to time just to see how things were going, and ask me a few more questions on certain things, you know, like one of the other thoughts was the air box in the back of the carburetors, because the bikes were air cooled in those days, and we would have a lot of trouble with the bike slowing down after about 3 laps.
Right.
You know, just losing that like 5 horsepower through the heat, all the heat that's generated at the front from the exhaust and the motor, and going back and then getting sucked back in to the engine with hot air. And I always knew it's a problem, but because you could noticeably feel the slowdown after 2 or 3 laps. I think some people didn't notice that, but I could always feel it. So then we came up with the air intake system, came from behind the seat. It wasn't like a ram air system or anything like that, it was just drawing cold air. So Steve came up with that design, which really worked, well. It just gave me that little bit of extra horsepower to make me a bit more competitive against the works bikes.
So you're a privateer racing the works bikes, weren't you?
Yes.
And so, I mean, extraordinary achievement. Straight out of the shed, you'd have done a bit of testing in New Zealand before you took it.
Yes. The time was our biggest enemy. We never really had enough time, and I would have liked to have done a lot more testing, and the best way to test is to actually do some race meetings before, you know, to really get to test a bike at its limit, you know.
And time didn't allow that.
Time never allowed that with me and Steve. That was probably one of the biggest problems. Like, the bike would have been nice if it was completed before the New Zealand season, to do the New Zealand season on it, and then go on to England. But we were racing in New Zealand, and then the bike was being finished towards the end of the season and then taken over. So we did a bit of testing. The very first time I got on it, I just rode up the driveway and up and down a little bit, and I could feel immediately, wow, it's just turning how I want it to turn. There's a couple of S-bends around here, and it was just doing, you know, very low speed stuff, but it was just doing exactly what I wanted. And the bike just felt part of you. You just sat in it. He had sculptured, he not only made the bike very sturdy, you know, in a straight line, but it turned very quickly, and he had sculptured it so that you actually sat in it and felt part of the bike, and it was just easy to ride.
So he built the bike around you, in essence. I mean, there's a shot out here back in the day of you sitting on the bike and Steve doing work, and
it's just the way he finished the bike off with the sculpture on the tank, and the position of the seat and how low it was. Everything just felt right. He just seemed to know exactly what to do.
And I suppose that excellence and innovation and radical approach was what led to the plastic version, the Kevlar version, becoming, I think it was Inventor of the Year, all categories, in '83, I think it was. So it's a huge achievement to take it out of the shed and then you're overseas.
That's right. I didn't know it at the time, but I think Steve always had in the back of his mind, of having a Kevlar version
Yes.
of the aluminium monocoque.
Yes.
And
yeah.
so he was very advanced in his thinking at the time.
Yes. Yeah.
Then again, probably not enough time for testing and that.
Yeah.
The following year we took the Kevlar bike over.
Yes.
But Rod Coleman helped us a hell of a lot on with the motors and all that. And,
Yes. Yeah.
and wheels, it wouldn't have been possible without Rod Coleman.
No.
Yeah.
And it became known as the Coleman Suzuki.
Correct.
Correct. Yeah. And looking at the racing side, David, what were the highlights of that in terms of effectively those 2 seasons, wasn't it? 82, 83.
Yes. We came third at the Isle of Man in the Formula One race.
Yes.
The bike was very good there. It was really good there.
Yeah.
So it's possible that I could have done better, but I didn't know the Isle of Man as well as guys like Joey Dunlop.
Sure.
So a third place there, I considered to be pretty good going.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the Isle of Man itself, I mean, as a person from here growing up looking at the Isle of Man, thinking it must have been a terrific experience.
You need to do a lot of laps to remember the circuit.
Yes.
And I mean, I did a lot of laps, just in a car and things like that. But you really got to be doing it at high speed.
Yes.
Because the corners are coming up so fast.
Yeah.
And it's so easy on some of those real fast corners just to be going into it 10 k's an hour slower. Yeah. So then bang, there goes 5 seconds. You've lost 5 seconds on that one corner.
Yeah.
So you really need to know it. And and you really wouldn't want to be trying to go too fast until you knew it well.
No. And the World Championships that first year, that was a very successful campaign, was it not?
Yes, we were doing quite well, and we came third in those World Championships.
Yes.
One of my better rides was at Donington, where there was about 7 works bikes in there, and I won that race. Which, it was quite. When you sort of win races, you seem to be doing it easier than when you come third or fourth. That's you're really sort of battling,
Yes.
And then we went on to Silverstone, and Suzuki GB were getting very interested in what was going on. They were getting beaten occasionally on this privateer's bike, which it was a Suzuki, but they didn't really like it, But they were trying to be seen to give me a bit of help here and there. And then I think the next meeting was at Silverstone, where high-speed circuit, and the bike was really, it just loved Silverstone.
Right.
And I loved Silverstone as well.
Yes. Yeah.
And we were about 3/4 into the race, and 3 or 4 of us are up the front, but I just knew I'm going to win this race. I was doing it easy. And a couple of corners coming into the last straight, I knew I could just go so much quicker, and then about 4 laps from the end, and this was really disappointing for me at this particular race. Suzuki GB had given me an ignition to put on the bike, like a magnesium ignition. So, I put this on, it's lighter, and that was just before that, or during that meeting, or just before it, and that ignition gave up during that race.
Oh no.
And I was very disappointed in a lot of different ways because of that.
Yes, okay, understandably so.
And then we went on to Portugal. That was another World Championship round, and I felt very comfortable on that circuit as well. But about halfway into the race, Mick Grant T-boned me. Going into a corner. He couldn't stop, and he hit me. and I didn't crash. I almost crashed, but the fairing was like right underneath the bike. So I came into the pits, and then they stripped the fairing off. My pit crew stripped the fairing off quickly, and I continued.
Yes. Yeah.
But just to try and get a few points, you know. But then I didn't have a number on the bike because they stripped the fairing off quickly. And so then the organiser said, no, you haven't got a number, you have to black flag me.
Right,
you know?
right.
But I probably would have still picked up a few points at that meeting. But the crowd were horrified that they black flagged me, the Portuguese. They just sort of loved the fact that I came in and then got back out again.
Yeah. So it sounds, David, like memories at the time, but from what you're saying, that if the those events hadn't happened, then in that year you were third in the World Championship F1 and third in the British Championship. You may well have taken out both if those events hadn't happened, and it's past history. But that undertaking, that experience, that achievement of coming out of the shed with a bike and doing that must have really shaken the motorcycle works teams.
It did shake them. A lot of people were taking a lot of interest in what was happening.
Yes.
But whether I could have done better or not, I wouldn't like to say. You know, there was some riders over there that were really riding really well at the time. You know, like Roger Marshall. He was very, very quick on his works. Suzuki, I think he was the quickest. Yeah. And so it's hard to say. But I came back to Australia on the bike and won the Swan Series, which was very satisfying for me. And then brought it on to New Zealand, where we did well as well in the local circuit. And at Whanganui, I think I did quite well on it again. Which was satisfying for Steve. Home circuit.
Home circuit, yes.
And it's the bike that he built. Which was very satisfying for Steve. Looking
back, I mean, a number of us would say, who are looking back, is that for New Zealand motorcycling, that period must have been quite a special time where a lot of good riders, a lot of machines coming in, Japanese machines. So it was the Marlborough series here. It was it must have been quite a time to be involved. There must be some pretty special memories back there.
Oh, for sure. It was, motorcycle was very big in New Zealand in those days, and racing was very big, and like you say, there was a lot of riders that were coming in to race in New Zealand because they'd heard about it and wanted to get that experience in their off season as well. It was a special time, I think, in the late 70s. All the good riders that New Zealand produced, you know, New Zealand had a lot of good riders. So if you were racing in New Zealand, you were, you know, you had to. It wasn't easy to get, you know, up there. You know.
Just ducking back a bit in your career, David, those Castrol 6-hour events, which you dominated for a number of years, five years. Well, it's hard to imagine today because there's nothing like it, I don't think. That must have been quite a unique event in those days.
Yes, it was probably the event of the year, the 6-hour, as far as all the manufacturers and distributors of motorcycles. They wanted to win that race, you know, to get the advertising out of it. So there was and the tyre companies as well wanted to win that event. So there was a lot of sort of money pushed that way in the way of sponsorship and things, and a lot of preparation that went into the 6-hour races. And of course your co-riders as well. My brother Neville, you know, Neil Shivers. So it was a team event. You know, Steve Dundon was the brains behind a lot of what we did in those 6-hour wins.
Steve Wellington Motorcycles.
Yes. And Joe Lett
Yes.
raced for Joe one year as well.
Yes. Yeah.
That was a great team to be on as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of satisfaction if you won that race.
Yes,
You know, it was a few weeks' work that went into that one event, and a lot of people were trying to win that. That's for sure.
Yes.
And it was a long race. A lot could happen.
Yes.
You know, the idea was just to keep on track and keep things running smoothly, and not to get too radical or out of place, or you know, keep your tyres together, keep your brakes together, make sure your refuelling was all done correctly. Yeah, there's a lot involved.
So going even further back, David, how did you get into motorcycle racing? You're a Lower Hutt boy originally, weren't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Gracefield was coming up in a few weeks' time, which we'd heard about. Yeah. We used to do a fair bit of road riding, you know, like over the Rimatuckas and that. Yeah. And then we would come across other people also riding on the weekends over the Rimatuckas. So there was a bit of a people would pass you and oh well, I can't let that happen, you know. Like, so we were had a bit of racing in our minds anyway. Yes. And then Gracefield came up, so we decided to enter.
And that's a local event in
Lower Hutt. Local event in Lower Hutt.
Yeah.
And so we decided to enter on our Norton Commandos. So we entered, and I think we both finished in the first 10. So we got a bit excited about that, so carried on from there.
So just going back to your time of working with Steve Roberts, and what you achieved then, do you see that as a real highlight in your experiences of life?
In my racing experience, that was probably the highlight, was on the aluminium monocoque. Yes. That whole year in Europe, in England, and in Australia and in New Zealand. That was probably the best year that I'd had. That would have been a highlight of my career.
Great satisfaction. Do you sometimes look back and wonder how you did it, because you were dominating certainly the Australasian scene in many respects during your highlight of those years?
Yes, you only really thought about your next race at the time, you know, that's pretty much all I ever thought about, what you're doing next. You know, you didn't look really back and think, oh well, I won this or I won that. You just
did it,
thinking forward all the time. So just kept pushing on. You know?
Well, it's been great to have this chat. There may be other things we want to touch on, but thank you for coming and sitting down in Steve's workshop and reminiscing about some of the good days. And it's great that you did that. Thank you.
No, it's my pleasure to be here and to have a look back in this workshop after all those years. It's must be over 40 years now. So a lot of memories. A lot of memories. Good. Tough times, but also some very good times.
Good stuff. Thank you very much,
pleasure,
David.
Rod.
Great to meet you.